Hey everyone, and welcome to another GameCast review. I'm Mark, and today I'll be reviewing Middle-earth: Shadow of War, now available for the PlayStation 4, Xbox One, and PC. If you haven't already, don't forget to check out Mike's review of Shadow of Mordor. Let's start, as always, with gameplay. Shadow of War behaves much like the previous entry in the series, except this time everything is much bigger. The core gameplay feels like a mix between the Batman Arkham games and Assassin's Creed as you run and climb like some sort of ghostly ninja and pounce on your unsuspecting victims. It felt great the first time around and it feels good here. There have been some minor changes and the general gameplay feels just a tiny bit more sluggish. You start the game with a few movement abilities unlocked, like sprinting and climbing faster, as well as a double jump of sorts. But apart from that, everything else must be unlocked through story or level progression. It feels good sprinting across rooftops and jumping over large gaps. You can close the distance between you and your objective rather easily and look good while doing it. The only problem is that with a bigger game, there are of course bigger environments and more buildings and things to cling to. Shadow of War uses a climbing system similar to Assassin's Creed, and so, much like that series, you'll find yourself climbing the wrong thing or sticking to objects you just don't want to. It can make time-sensitive motions very frustrating. Combat in Shadow of War is similar to its predecessor and the Batman Arkham games. It's very rhythmic, chaining strikes and counterattacks together to build combos and execute special moves. Unlike the first, however, your special moves aren't necessarily tied to how high your combo count is. Instead, you build up might from the combo chain and stock it for later use. It adds a little more planning to how you fight, as you can't rely on a quick combo giving you the edge you need. Your might attacks can also be heavily customized to cater to enemy strengths and weaknesses. Should you spend that might on an area effect fire blast, or should you save it for a chance to quickly brand your opponent? There's a lot to keep track of in battle, and keeping a level head is vital. Most of your combat skills can be upgraded to carry elemental affinities, making it possible to target specific weaknesses. The enemy AI is also adaptive, so sometimes you need to get a little creative if you want to defeat a warchief. New to the series is Elven Rage, a super mode not unlike the temporary damage boosts that you'd get in character action games like God of War or Bayonetta. Basically, it gives you a finite time to launch an onslaught of arrows and free execution attacks to help even the odds. While I appreciate that it's there, and it did save me a few times, I never felt like I was using it correctly. It felt messy and unimportant amongst your other skills. There's plenty to see and do in Shadow of War, however it does take quite a bit to get going. The real meat of the game and open environments don't come until Act 2, and that's after roughly 3 to 4 hours of Act 1 where you are unable to brand Uruks. Once you reach Act 2, everything feels better and the game starts to let go of the reins a bit. There are plenty of main and side missions, but your real goal is to build an army and take control of each region of the map. It initially feels much like the previous game, with a host of randomized Uruk and Orlog captains that follow a war chief, and then those war chiefs follow an overlord. You then topple the hierarchy through branding, killing or shaming your opponents until the chain of command breaks, and then you chop off the head of the operation. It feels good and there's a decent amount of player freedom involved with exactly how to approach the chain of command. It's a lot of fun and feels rewarding when everything goes according to plan and you have a network of traders ready to pounce. The issue is how long it all takes. Progressively taking over each region in the safest ways possible takes several hours per region. It feels very monotonous running between missions and sitting through arena battles until you're ready to replace or kill a war chief. Rinse and repeat until all war chiefs have been dealt with and the cycle repeats for the next region. While it's still enjoyable, it kind of overstays its welcome for the amount of repetition involved for a feature that was the highlight of the original. Just giving me more to do probably wasn't the best way to go about things. However, it all culminates in Shadow of War's newest feature, the siege battles. These are large-scale encounters where you lead a literal army into a stronghold, taking key locations and eventually taking out the region's overlord. While these are huge visual spectacles, I found them to be a bit underwhelming. The more prepared you are before one of these battles, the easier it is. However, if you've either killed or replaced any of the war chiefs, then you can pretty much just walk through the fortress with little to no resistance. The only real challenge comes in the Overlord, who usually deals high damage and has very few weaknesses. There are a couple online components as well, like vendettas and conquests. Online vendettas task players with eliminating a war chief that has defeated another player. These missions drop you in self-contained environments and net you some cool rewards. The online conquests are pretty much replayable siege battles. Here you take on other players' strongholds with the potential for your orcs to die if you act carelessly. They're fun side activities and they net you some free loot boxes, which is nice. Speaking of loot boxes, Shadow of War feels like a game that really doesn't need the system of microtransactions. You can ignore the system entirely if you want, however as the game gets harder and the grind gets longer, it seems like the only choice for high rarity Uruks. Fortunately, the in-game currency is plentiful and completing daily challenges can net you some of the premium currency too. It was a frustrating feature to see included, but it is avoided easily enough until the final act, where at times it seems like the easy way out. Next, let's talk about the story. Shadow of War picks up right after the events of Shadow of Mordor, with Talion and Celebrimbor deciding it's time to forge a new ring and topple Sauron's reign for good. Talion quickly loses said ring and then finds himself swept up in smaller events like defending Minas Ithil or hunting Nazguls. Once the second act kicks in, most of these stories take a back seat as the majority of the game is Celebrimbor and Talion talking about building an army. Both characters also seem quite a bit more aggressive this time around, and it made a few interactions with some of the characters awkward. The game ends on an interesting note and ties into the main Lord of the Rings storyline with a few creative liberties. The real star of the story are the narratives told through the Nemesis system. For example, I was being hunted in a forest one day by a skilled mystic Uruk. I managed to damage him just enough to shame him and hopefully lower his level. Instead, I drove him insane and he began stalking me throughout the region. I ended up killing him several times and eventually recruited him, and now he sits as one of my most trusted war chiefs despite being completely insane. I loved this part of the game and it made each encounter special as I wondered if a decision would come back to haunt me. It's also fun seeing Uruks come back that have been battle scarred and want vengeance. Next, let's talk about the look and feel of the game. Shadow of War feels like a bit of a downgrade. I thought it was a little more sluggish and unresponsive, which made some battles much harder than they should have been. I remember the first game being very responsive, which is part of the reason why I love it so much. Shadow of War is also much bigger than the previous entry, however because of that there are a few rough edges. Talion, for example, looks a bit off in cutscenes, and the weather and cape effects, while still good, just aren't what they were before. Many animations don't match up correctly, and the camera can be a bit of a mess in some of the bigger brawls. You can outfit Talion with a number of different weapons and armors, however they won't show in cutscenes, which is a little disappointing. The environments show a good amount of variety, and for the most part they all had their own visual identity. The game is also pretty buggy. I had a couple situations with Talion stuck on environments, falling through the ground and dying, fog loading incorrectly, beasts stuck in buildings, and 2 audio bugs during cutscenes. While it doesn't severely damage the experience, the frequency of these events makes the whole game feel underdone. Thankfully, the enemy variety is top notch, and it's always fun hearing new Uruk banter. The soundtrack is good and suits the Middle-earth franchise rather well. Most of the voice acting is good, however Talion and Celebrimbor's anger still seems a little much at times. Some of the Uruks without voice filters are just strange, and some of the dialogue seems odd because of it. The sound effects are good and it makes execution attacks all the more impactful. There's plenty of fun to be had in Shadow of War, and it would be a completionist's dream and nightmare trying to fill in blank spots in each chain of command. It's a long journey that doesn't really finish when it should. Act 4 could have easily been listed as post-game or epilogue content, however it starts right at a good endpoint, which is strange. I enjoyed my time with the game, however I felt the pacing was incredibly awkward and the grind often ruined the momentum of the game. Shadow of War is proof that bigger doesn't always mean better. It's still a great game, but it doesn't shake things up enough to warrant doing the same thing over and over again for 40 to 50 hours. If you've never played the series before, then there's plenty to love here. However, if you've played the previous title, it's probably best to wait for a sale. Stick around at GameCast for more great gaming content. You can also find more from me over at Arisen Culture or right here as part of the review team. Thanks for watching, bye!
Next time I'll be victorious!